Hello, welcome to this lecture of biomathematics. In this lecture, we will be discussing a new concept, very important concept, which is a very basic concept and important concept to understand any physical system. So, since our aim is to understand biology and biological systems using mathematics, it is very important to understand this particular concept. So, the idea, the concept that we study today is called vectors. So, today's topic is vectors. We will discuss what is vector, what are vectors, and what is the importance of this, and why exactly we need to know this vectors. So, before discussing that, the first question comes to anybody's mind when we come to any topic is that why should we learn this topic at all? Why should we learn about vectors at all? So, that is the next question that we want to ask. Why should we learn about vectors? So, let us take to answer this question that why should we learn about vectors, let us take some very common things in biology, and then let us try to understand those things, and then we will see that to understand them we need to understand a new idea, and that idea is called vector. So, the most important part of biology in some sense are proteins, and proteins and DNA, many molecules, biomolecules are actually charged molecules. So, they all have charge, and we have been discussing various things about charges and all that. And when there are charged molecules, they attract, repel and all that. So, let us think about a bit about charged molecules and ask a few questions, and let us see to answer those questions whether we need something new or not, and then we would need something new, and then we will go ahead and learn this. So, let us think about a bit about charges today to begin with, and let us see where we go from there. So, the first question about charges actually is that, have a look at here. So, we all know that two charges, whether they are sometimes if they are positive and negative charges, opposite charges, they attract, and when they are opposite charges, the same charges, they repel. So, charges either attract or repel. So, if you have a look at here, if you have a plus q and a minus q, then they attract. That means, this minus charge will move towards the plus charge. There will be a force on this charge, and the force on this charge will be, the magnitude of the force will be q square by some constant k times r square, where r is the distance between these two charges. This we know. This is the famous Coulomb's law. So, we also know that this is the magnitude of the force, and the force on this negative charge is such a way that they are attracting. That means, the negative charge will be pulled towards the plus charge. The force on this charge due to this charge will be such that this charge will be repelled away. So, this charge will be repelled in this direction of arrow. So, these two arrows here this arrow represents, you can see that this arrow, from this arrow you will understand that this charge is being pulled in this particular direction. From this arrow you understand that this charge is being pushed away in this direction. So, you have two charges. When they are opposite, this charge will push this charge away in this direction. When they are opposite, this charge will pull this charge towards this. So, these are some things that we know. So, charges either can repel in one direction or it get attracted in the opposite direction. So, there is a direction coming here. We had to put some arrows. So, look at to tell you to convey to somebody that this is being attracted in this direction, this is being repelled in this direction, we had to put some arrows. So, have a look at this slide here. You have to put arrows to convey to somebody that it is being attracted in this direction, it is being repelled in this direction. So, we started saying that mathematics is a language. If mathematics is a language, to tell you that it is being repelled in a particular direction or it is being attracted in a particular direction, in a picture we can put arrows. If you speak in English, we can say that it is going towards this and all that. But in mathematics, how do we do that? So, the answer to that is vectors. So, vectors will help you precisely telling in which direction things move or in which direction the force is being applied. So, in which direction the attraction is happening or in which direction the repulsion is happening. So, all this, if you want to precisely convey to somebody, you have to use this idea of vectors. So, that is the need of vectors. So, we will go ahead and then see more examples and precisely understand how do we use this vector idea to convey this direction, this thing about direction, in which direction things are moving or in which direction the force is being applied. But the need of the vector is basically to convey the direction of any quantity that would be either moving or. So, what are the quantities that are having direction? So, that is the question. So, that is something we will come. So, the vectors are some quantities that are having direction. So, force is a vector. You saw that force has either you can apply a force in this particular way or you apply a force in this way. So, force has direction. So, force is a vector. So, in mathematics, vector is defined as a quantity that has direction. So, let us look at this force a little more. How do we precisely put this direction thing in using mathematics? So, that is the question we have. How do we put this direction in using a mathematical symbol? So, let us look at the next slide and the answer is here. So, let us look at the force again. So, you have two charges q1 and q2 and we want the force on the second charge at q2 due to the first charge. So, that force is represented by F with a sign here which is an arrow here. This is this saying that F is a vector. So, any vector is typically represented by an arrow on the top. So, this is the mathematical representation of a vector. If any quantity is a vector, you typically put an arrow on top of this. And the value of the force is basically, as we know, q1 q2 by k r square. That is the value of this, and this being repelled in the direction of the x axis. So, you can see here there is x axis and y axis in the slide. Have a look at the slide. There is x axis and y axis and you have two charges and the charge is being pushed in this direction of the x axis. So, look at the slide in the direction. So, this is your x axis and this is your y axis. So, in the direction of the x axis is where in the direction of the plus x axis, as this is the x axis, increasing direction of x axis. So, this is the direction of the force. So, now we have to put that. So, that is what we have put here, x with a hat like sign. So, this is can call it x hat or x cap. So, this symbolizes that the direction of the force is in the direction of the x axis. The direction of the force is in the direction of the x axis. That is what this means. So, x is a unit vector along the x axis. So, this is a vector which is along the x axis and the magnitude, if I write this symbol, that means the magnitude is just 1. So, it is direction which is along the x axis and the magnitude is 1. So, that is what it means. So, any vector that we are going to represent will have a magnitude and a direction. So, have a look at this here. So, the vector f will have some magnitude. Let me call this alpha, the magnitude, and some direction So, the mod of f will give you the magnitude alpha, the x. So, this is the magnitude. This is the direction. What does this imply? This implies is that the force is along the x axis. So, this is what it implies. Now, if you want to say that it is along the x axis, but so this typically means that along the increasing direction of the x axis, because here there is a plus x, there is no particular. So, now if you want, so this particularly means in this direction, as we said. Now, let us say you have a force in this direction, which is the decreasing direction of the x axis. Then, so if there is a force in the decreasing direction of the x axis, you can say that minus x cap means in this particular direction, which is, we can call it decreasing direction of the x axis. So, now what is, so this is basically the another notation to show that something is in the decreasing direction of the x axis. Now, let us have a look at this next slide. Here what you have is q1 and q2, which are one is a plus charge and the next one is a minus charge, and the force on the second charge due to the first charge is again q1 q2 by r square, but it is in this direction of the minus x axis. It is in this direction. It is the direction along the x axis, but they are attracting. So, the direction is this. So, see the direction of the arrow. So, the direction is towards the minus decreasing x axis, just as we just discussed. So, you have to put a minus x cap. So, that is why there is a minus x cap here. So, this minus x, the magnitude is q1 q2 by k r square, but it is in the direction of the minus x cap. So, that is what this represents now. So, if we learned a new way of telling the direction by putting x cap, which is a unit vector along the x axis. You can also similarly, you can put a unit vector along the y axis. So, if there is something along the y axis, have a look at this paper here. If something is along y axis, you can put y cap. So, something is along x axis, you put x cap. So, now let us look at this next question what we are interested. So, now we learned about two charges, and either they can attract, which is along the minus x axis, or they can repel, which is along the increasing direction of the x, you will say with the x cap. Now, let us go to a little more complicated situation. Let us look at three charges. Let us see what happens when there are three charges. So, have a look at this. So, you have three charges there. There is a plus q, there is another plus q, and there is a minus q. Now, let us ask this question. Let us say this charge and this charge are fixed there, and let us ask the question, in which direction will the negative charge move? So, the negative charge either has to move this, so this charge will attract this negative charge, this also will try to attract this negative charge. So, the negative charge will move this way, or which way will the negative charge move? So, that is the question that we want to ask. Which way will this particular negative charge move? To find the answer to this particular question, we need to understand a little more about vectors. So, you have a force along one way and two particular different directions. we have to find out what is the sum of these forces. You have to learn something about adding vectors, etc. You have to learn something about subtracting vectors. So, let us go and understand how do we add vectors, how do we subtract vectors, etc. So, this is some interesting concept that which we want to learn. But before that, before just doing this, let us see what we understand, what we discussed so far. So far we said, so we said something about vectors, and we said the vectors have something having direction. So what are the other quantities other than vectors? So there are two types of quantities. There are scalars and vectors. So have a look at this slide. So there are something called scalars and there is something called vectors. So scalars are just numbers representing magnitude, for example, mass, energy, temperature. These things have no direction. Mass has no particular direction. Energy has no particular direction. Temperature has no particular direction. So these things are called scalars. They are just numbers. Mass can be like 3 kg, 4 kg, 3 gram. There is nothing called 3 gram upwards, 3 gram downwards. 3 gram is 3 gram, there is no direction for it. Similarly, we can say energy is 23 joule. There is no 23 joule up or 23 joule down. There is no direction for energy. Similarly, you can have, for example, temperature. You can say it is temperature is 23 degrees Celsius or 40 degrees Celsius. So again, temperature is a scalar, so it has just a number representing it. So that is the magnitude of the temperature. Now we have vectors. Have a look at this. Vectors have magnitude and direction. Example are displacement, that is how far you moved. So when you displacement is, so let's say I go 2 meter northwards. So there is the direction towards north, towards south, towards west. They are direction which we use in everyday life. So these are vectors. These quantities are vectors. Displacement, I go northwest direction. So when you ask somebody, if I want to go to this particular place, how do you go? Then you will say you go there, turn left, then go straight and then turn right. So the left, right, straight, back, these are like directions. So displacement is basically a vector which has direction. You can either displace straight, or you can get displaced into the left, you can get displaced to the right, you can get displaced in the north-south direction, you can get displaced in the you can get displaced in the northeast direction or northwest direction. You cannot get displaced in the north-south direction. You can either get displaced in the northeast direction or northwest direction. Similarly, so to say all this mathematically, we need to have use the idea of vectors. As we saw just now, force is also a vector. Have a look at this. Force is another quantity that is vector. Another quantity that is vector is flow. Something is flowing. You can either flow in this direction, flow in this direction. Whenever there is a flow, there is always, to tell this flow, we have to have vectors. So in biology, flow is very common. Like let's say protein concentration, when the things flow from, proteins move from one place to other place. So there is always direction associated with it. There is complicated 3D structure of proteins. So you have to have this atom is in this direction, and another atom is in this direction, some other atom is some other direction. So you have to tell these directions. So to say this, the position of atoms properly, again you have to use vectors. So you have to use position, you have to have force. Again, in biology, all this atoms or proteins get pulled in a particular direction, or so they move, this is a vector, they have a force, they feel a force which is also a vector. And for example, proteins like actin monomers, they flow. They flow from one part of, so there are many things that flow in biology. So you have heard of diffusion, where they flow from higher concentration to lower concentration. So that is also a vector. There is a vector involved there. So to learn all this, we have to have a good understanding of vectors. So as we know, the simplest vector is position. So let us understand a bit about this vector called position vector. So have a look at this slide, next slide. So here the green point in the slide, the green point is represented by a vector d. So we can ask the question, how do we tell the position of the green point? How do we tell the position of this particular point? So to reach this particular point, starting from this 0 0, which is the origin, you have to go 3 units along the x axis and 4 units along the y axis. So if you go 3 units along the x axis and 4 units along the y axis, you will get this particular vector d, this position of this green dot. So that is represented as d is equal to 3 along the x axis, that is 3x. So x is the direction you have to go along the, so you go to 3 meters, let us say these are meters. So if you go 3 meters along the x axis and 4 meters along the y axis, you will reach this. So you can say this position vector d is nothing but 3x plus 4y. So this is 3x plus 4y. Then you can ask the question, so these two numbers 3 and 4 are the crucial important points. They represent this particular green point. Now let us look at some other point. So let us say a point here. To reach to this point, you have to go 3 along the x axis and 4 along the minus y axis, in this minus direction. In the decreasing direction of y, you have to go 4. So how do you write? 3 along the x axis, so 3x in the increasing direction, 4 along the decreasing direction of the y, minus y. So that is 4 along minus 4y. So this point is represented by 3x minus 4y. This minus represent along the y, you have to 4 unit, you have to go in the decreasing direction of the y, in the minus y direction. Similarly, what about this point here? This point here is, to reach this point, you have to come 3 units along the decreasing direction of the x axis and 4 units along the decreasing direction of the y axis. So the total is 3x minus 4y. So this minus 3 and minus 4 are two quantities that basically describe this particular point. So as you see here, there are two quantities, two numbers you need to describe a vector in 2 dimension. So these are x component and y component. So that is the next point that I want to make. In 2D, a vector will be represented by two numbers, its x component and y component. So let us look at a few more examples. So let us look at this paper here. So let me draw here. So this is our x axis and this is our y axis. Any number here, any number on any point on this, let us say some point here. To reach this point, we have to go negative x axis something and then along in this particular direction. So, you have to go this way and this way. So, this point, so the distance you have to travel here is, first you travel this way. So, you have to go to some distance, let us call this distance A. So, A distance you have to go along the minus x axis, and you have to go B distance along the plus y axis. So, B distance along the plus y axis. So, the total distance for this vector r is this particular vector which is going from here to here. So, this r vector will be minus a into x, a into minus x is minus a x plus b y cap. So, this is this r. A x minus a x plus b y. So, I can represent this point by two numbers minus a comma b, that is minus a along the x axis and b along the y axis. So, any two numbers, you need two numbers to represent the vector, the x component and y component. So, similarly, if I tell you that you have a vector which distance is 13, 7. So, two numbers if I say, this immediately vector means that the vector r is 13 x plus 7 y. If I tell you what does it mean? That means that you have to go 13 units along the x axis. So, you have to reach here 13 units and 7 units along the y axis. So, you will get this is 7. So, you get this vector r which is 13 x plus 7 y. Similarly, if I tell you another one 13 minus 7, what does it mean is that you have to go 13 along the x axis. So, you go along the x axis 13. So, this vector r will be 13 along the x axis plus 7 along the minus y axis. So, minus 7 y. So, 13 along this x axis minus 7, that is in this direction 7 along the y axis. So, then you have this particular vector r. So, two numbers represent a vector and these two numbers are x component and y component. So, any point you can see on a 2D plane can be represented by two numbers. They are called x component and y component. Now, similarly, if you go to 3D, in a 3D, a vector will be represented by three components: x component, y component, z component. We will come and discuss the 3D vectors in the coming lectures soon. But today we will stick to 2D and try and understand the idea of vector in 2D properly, so that it is very easy to go and do it in the 3D. Okay, now let us say we want to tell you something. Let us say we want to say something in the using the language of mathematics. We want to say that I want to lift this. I have this box with me, and let us say I want to lift this box up, or I want to slide this box along in this direction. So, let us say I want to lift this box in this direction, I might want to slide this box in this direction. So, I have to say these things mathematically. So, how do we say this? Lifting in this direction, sliding in this direction. I have to apply some force to lift it, I can apply some force to slide it. So, now I have to tell somebody, you apply some force in this direction. How do I say this? So, just like we saw this for force for the charges, we can say exactly similar way. So, let us have a look at this. So, the question what we want to ask is, how do I say, have a look at the slide here, how do I say that I need to apply 3 Newton force to lift a box? So, to lift a box, you have to lift along the x axis z. So, I define this axis as z axis, for it is just a name. I can call it z or y or whatever I want. I am calling this z axis, and I want to lift it. Lifting means moving along the z axis. So, the way I say is that if I say f is 3 z, that means you have to apply 3 Newton force along the z axis to lift the box. If I say f is equal to 3 x, I have to apply 3 Newton force along the x direction. This is my x axis. So, if I tell somebody f is equal to 3 z in mathematics, they will understand that you have to apply a force of f along the z axis. If I tell somebody that f is equal to 3 x cap, they will understand that you will apply a force along the x direction. So, when you do an experiment, if you want to clearly say that please apply a force along this direction, you can precisely write in mathematics. Okay, so we understand telling the simple things, how do we apply force, etc. Then we have to come and understand how do we know about 3 charges. That is something which we had this question, that we have 3 charges and we want to know about this force. So, that is one question that we asked in the beginning. So, let us go back to that question. So, let us go to the slide. So, we have 3 charges q1, q2 and q3, and we want to know the force on the second charge due to these charges. What is the force? So, it turns out that the force on the second charge F2 due to other charges is F21 plus F23. What does this mean? This means is that force on the second charge is the sum of force on the second charge due to 1 plus force on the second charge due to 3. F21 means force on the second charge due to the first charge. So, force on this charge due to this charge plus the force on this charge due to this charge. So, there are 2 vectors and the sum of these 2 vectors is the total force, is the resultant force. Now, to learn this, you of course, have to understand how to sum the vectors, how to sum 2 vectors. So, how do we sum 2 vectors? This is something we will understand. So, the way of summing 2 vectors is basically summing their components. Just simply sum the components. So, we said that any vector can be represented by 2 components. So, vector A, I can say is 2, 3. What would mean? It means 2 along the x axis and 3 along the y axis. Now, I have another vector B, which is 3, 7. These are 2 components. This is means 3 along the x axis and 7 along the y axis. A plus B is basically 2x plus 3y. This is this vector plus this vector, which is 3x plus 7y. Now, when you have such a situation, the thing you should do is that add this component and this component are x. this and this are y. So, add the components. So, the answer is 2x plus 3x is 5x, 3y plus 7y is 10y. So, answer is 2 plus 3 5x plus 3 plus 7 10y. So, this is the answer. So, adding vectors is basically adding the components. So, we will discuss about adding vectors a little more detail. So, but adding vectors is essentially adding the components. Now, in the case of charges, let us see what are the vectors. So, we have to calculate essentially the force on the second charge. To now calculate the force, we know something about the position of these vectors, because force is q1 q2 by r square, where r is the position, the distance. So, how do we know about distance? To know about the distance, let us try and understand something more about this distance. So, let us have a look at this particular slide. Have a look at this slide. So, you have q1, q2 and q3. Now, you have, I place q1 in the x axis at a position minus 6. I position q2 in the y axis at a position plus 8. I position q3 along the x axis at a position plus 4. So, I have positioned 3 charges in the xy plane. Now, what is r1? Essentially is the position of the x axis, the vector, with essentially this vector starting from here to here, starting from, that is basically minus 6x. That means, to get to the position of the first one, you have to go minus 6 along the x axis. So, that is, you can say r1, which is position of the first charge, is minus 6x. You have to go 6 units, let us say the 6 meters along the x axis. Now, this is q2, you have to go 8 units along the y axis. So, let us say, so then this is mathematically written as r2 is equal to plus 8y. You have to go plus 8 in the plus y direction, plus 8 y. Now, what about this third charge? Third charge is at 4. So, that means r3 is plus 4x. You have to go plus 4 along the x axis. That is what this means. So, you know r1, we know r2, we know r3. Now, we know that we have 2 charges. Have a look at here, you have 2 charges, and the force, if this is charge 1 and this is charge 2, and let r12 be the distance between the charge 1 and 2, and the force then is q1 q2 by k r12 square. So, you have to know, you have to know what is the distance between the charges. We know now in this slide, we know the position of charge 1, we know the position of charge 2, we know the position of charge 3, but we do not know what is the distance between 1 and 2, what is the distance between 1 and 3, what is the distance between 2 and 3, we have to know this. So, how do we calculate this? That is the next question. So, now we will go ahead and calculate the distance between the 2 charges. So, have a look at this slide. So, r1 is the position of this charge, r2 is the position of this charge, and r12 is the position from the first charge to the second charge. So, look at this arrows carefully. R1 is the distance from here to here, this is the arrow direction. R2 is the distance from here to here, R12 is the distance from here to here, that is from the first charge to the second charge. So, distance from the vector from first charge to the second charge is R12, and we know that R1 is minus 6x, you have to go 6 in the minus x direction. R2 is plus 8y, you have to go plus 8 along the y axis. Now, what is R12? That is the question we are asking. What is R12? Now, if I look at this diagram, I can immediately say if I go here and then from here to if I go along this arrow, I would have reached this position R2. So, that means if I go R1 plus R12 is nothing but R2. If I walk along this way and this way, I would have reached R2. So, R2 is nothing but R1 plus R12. So, that is what written here in the first equation. So, have this first equation and this diagram a few times slowly and carefully, and then you will understand that what this equation is correct. That is, what is written here is that R2, this distance, this vector, this distance is nothing but this plus this. If I go this way and if I go this way, I get R2. So, R2 is R1 plus R12. This is something we just write down, just common sense actually. By looking at this picture, you can write it down. So, this is essentially the common sense. So, once we know this R12, so from this equation we can calculate R12 actually. So, I can take this side, I can say R12 is R2 minus R1, and we know that R2 is 8y and R1 is 6 minus 6x, and R2 minus R1 is 8y minus 6x, because R1 is minus 6x. So, minus is plus. So, you can, this R12 is 8y plus 6x. So, the vector R12 is essentially 8y plus 6x. So, you have a new vector R12 as 8y plus 6x. Similarly, we want to calculate other vectors like R2, 3 and all that. So, let us go ahead and see what next. How do we calculate R2, 3? Have a look at this slide. So, here Q1 is the first charge and R1 is the distance from here to here. Going from here to here in this direction is R1, and going from here to here in this direction is R3, and R13 is going from here to here, that is going from first charge to the third charge. This distance, this position vector is R13. Be careful, just look at this carefully. R13 is the distance from here to here. So, now how do we understand this R13? R13 can be understood, R13 is equal to, so we have to get the R13, but let us do a walk along this and let us see what we get. If we walk R3 along this direction, I will reach Q3, then I walk back, that is in the opposite direction of R13, I walk this distance. If I walk back, that is the negative direction, if I walk R13, if I walk this much R13 distance along this, I will reach Q1. So, if I walk R3 here, I will reach Q3. Then if I walk R13 along in this direction, opposite direction, I will reach Q1. So, if I say R3 minus R13, R3 minus R13 in the opposite direction, I will reach R1. So, that is what this equation says. The equation says that I go from this point, I go here, then go back certain distance. So, R3 minus R13. R3 minus R13, then I will reach here. I want to reach here. First I go certain distance, then I go back a lot more distance. So, that is what is written here. Then I will get from this, I can say R13 is R3 minus R1, because I can take R13 this side and R1 this side, rearrange this. So, I would get R13 is R3 minus R1. So, if I know R3 and if I know R1, I can calculate R13, which is R3 minus R1, R3 is 4x, R1 is minus 6x. So, 4 3 minus 6x is 10x. So, R3 is 10x, and we know that if this is 4 and this is x, the distance has to be 10, and this is 10 along the x axis. So, this is 10x. R13 is 10x. So, we got R13 also. Now, what we want is the next R23. So, have a look at the next one. If I look at this slide, again R23 in a similar manner we can calculate. R23 can be calculated as R3 minus R2. So, R3 is 4x, R2 is 8y. So, R3 minus R2 is 4x minus 8y. So, what do we have? We have R12, R13 and R23. So, these are three vectors that we got. So, let us write down this here what we got. So, we got a few things. So, we got basically R12. So, we have this charges, right. So, we have these 3 charges here, and R12 is basically, so we have, I call this 1 and this 2 and this is 3 charges, and R12 is this distance, R13 is this distance, and R23 is this distance from 2 to 3, R23. So, we have these 3 vectors we got, and what did we get? R13 is equal to, so let us write down all these vectors. R13 we had got R13 as 10x, R12 we had got as 8y plus 6x, this is something we had got, and R23 we had got R23 we had got R23 as basically 4x minus 8y. So, we had got 3 vectors, and these are these 3 vectors. Now, our aim is to calculate the force, which is a little more elaborate process. So, we will discuss the calculation of the force in the next class, but we have these 3 vectors, we know all the distances between the charges. If we know the distance, we know how to calculate the force, but to get the direction of the force, we have to go things a little more in detail. So, just remember these 3 vectors that we got, we will, knowing these 3 vectors, how to calculate the force, that is that we will discuss in the next class. So, we have R12, R23 and R13, and what we essentially will do is that we know, as we said, F on the second one, force we wrote as F on 2 due to 1 plus F 2 to 3, and we know that we have to know what is F 2 1, what is F 2 3. These two things we have to know. We will calculate that and we will calculate the resulting force. That is in the next class. To summarize what we learned today, let us summarize this. So, this is our summary. Many physical quantities that we deal with are vectors. For example, we said force, etc. So, there are many physical quantities that we deal are vectors. So, and vectors have magnitude and direction. So, have a look at this. And vector, we know how to add vectors. So, this vector addition we learned a bit about. So, there are three things that we learned. Many quantities like force, flow, position are vectors, and vectors have a magnitude and direction, and vector, how do we add two vectors? We briefly saw, we will see them in greater details in the coming class. So, this is the summary of what we learned today. Now, we will go ahead and calculate the force between the charges, but we learned today how to calculate the distance between the charges if they are placed in a different places in 2D plane. So, with this we will stop today's lecture and see you for the next lecture. Bye.